Home Alone is a time-honored classic watched by millions of Americans year after year. But what you may not have known is that Home Alone's production had to overcome some huge problems to become the holiday staple it is today. So sit back and relax and
don't get scared now,
because you're about to discover the behind-the-scenes story about 3 problems that almost ruined Home Alone. Home Alone was directed by Chris Columbus, and the screenplay was written and produced by the legendary John Hughes, who was responsible for some of the most successful movies of the 1980s. So you'd think that with the Midas touch of John Hughes, any movie studio would recognize the quality of Home Alone, right? Well, Warner Brothers didn't. Hughes sold the script to Warner Brothers on the promise that it would be a low-budget $10 million movie. So in order to get the most bang for their buck, the filmmakers had the whole production, including all sound stages and offices, set up in a high school of all places. But not just any high school, it was the abandoned New Trier High School where several of John Hughes' movies were filmed, such as Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Uncle Buck. So almost all the interiors of the homes you see in Home Alone were built in small sections inside the high school gymnasium. And the basement of the Murphys' house that had to be flooded was built inside the shallow end of the drained swimming pool. But despite the filmmakers' best efforts to keep costs down, Home Alone's budget had exceeded their $10 million allowance to come to about $14.7 million, which is still a very small margin in comparison to other movies made at the time. But it didn't matter, because Warner Brothers still didn't like that number and told them they needed to lower the budget down to $3.5 million or else they'd pull the plug on the whole thing. Well, the filmmakers pushed back by saying they were already operating at their lowest cost, and instead of negotiating any further,
it's too late.
Warner Brothers just shut down their whole production. And that would have been the end of Home Alone. But in a twist of fate, 2 weeks earlier, John Hughes had had a casual conversation with his buddy Tom Jacobson, who was the creative executive at 20th Century Fox, and the studio's president Joe Roth was there as well. And so he told them about the money issues he was having with Warner Brothers. So they asked Hughes to tell them about the movie, which he did. And it was that sales pitch that saved Home Alone, because Joe Roth was so convinced of the story's potential that he said if Warner Brothers wasn't willing to make the movie for $14.7 million, then he would. So they struck up a deal that if Warner Brothers ever dropped them, then 20th Century Fox would pick up the tab. So when Warner Brothers did deliver the news that Home Alone's production was being shut down, the producers just pretended to be devastated about it, and then called up 20th Century Fox to make the switch. And just like that, Home Alone was shut down and then reopened for business in a matter of minutes, almost as if nothing ever happened. But this wasn't the end of their troubles, because Daniel Stern ended up quitting in the middle of the production over money. His co-star Joe Pesci was a big name in the industry, so the challenge was to find someone who could measure up to Pesci's acting chops. And Chris Columbus was absolutely sure Daniel Stern was the perfect choice for Marv. So the actor auditioned, got the role, and started working. But once Stern found out that the 6 weeks of work he was contracted for were actually going to turn into 8 or more, he asked to be compensated for that extra time. But that wasn't going to happen, since the film was on a very tight budget. So Stern decided to quit out of a sense of pride for his value, and Dan Roebuck was put in to replace him. But after just 3 days of screen tests, it was clear to everyone that Roebuck and Pesci had no chemistry, so Roebuck had to go. So Chris Columbus convinced Daniel Stern to come back, and prevented him from making one of the biggest mistakes of his career. But there was a last-minute problem during post-production that could have changed the whole feeling of the film, which was the music. At first, Chris Columbus had hired Bruce Broughton to write the music, because he scored the film Young Sherlock Holmes that Columbus had written. But disaster struck when Columbus found out that Broughton was under a deadline to finish his work on The Rescuers Down Under and had to back out of doing Home Alone. So at the 11th hour, the filmmakers were left with no composer and no clue about what to do next. As a joke, Chris Columbus said, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if we got John Williams?" Well, they all had a good laugh at that, thinking Williams was way out of their league. But Chris Columbus decided to throw a Hail Mary anyway, and used his relationship with Steven Spielberg to get a copy of the movie to Williams, who loved it. And within 3 weeks, he created the iconic music that elevated the movie beyond everyone's wildest dreams. So despite all its production troubles, the little low-budget comedy Home Alone triumphed at the box office, raking in $285 million in the US alone, and went on to become one of the most memorable and long-lasting Christmas movies of all time. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. For more facts about the Home Alone movies, click the video up above, or check out the suggested video down below to discover more fun facts about your favorite films.